The big question this time around is not who, but why. This case began in the summer of 2006 when an unidentified body of a woman was found floating in the Newport Beach harbor in Southern California.
Barbara didn't show up for work. She didn't call. She didn't warn anyone. The phone was turned off. No one answered her home calls. The neighbor downstairs noticed that no one had turned on the lights in the apartment since the evening. But no official police report was filed. Too little time had passed, too much speculation. Rachel, who was finally reached by phone, said that Mom went away for a couple of days to recharge. And everything remained the same. No calls, no letters, no signal. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Barbara Ann Malenix was born in the late 1940s in a small, quiet coastal town in California, a place where the rhythm of life was slow and traditions were rarely questioned. She moved to Orange County, got a job in an administrative position at a law firm, and soon bought her own two-room apartment. There, in a quiet area with palm trees and neat lawns, she began to build a new life. A few years later, fate took another sharp turn. Barbara became pregnant from a casual affair, and her daughter, Rachel, was born. The relationship with the girl's father was fleeting, and he almost immediately disappeared from the family's life. Barbara was left alone again, but this time, she was ready. She raised Rachel with almost fanatical devotion. The girl always looked neat, danced, sang in a choir, went to summer camps. Her mother monitored her surroundings, controlled her leisure time, assessed her friends, and intervened if she felt threatened. Those around her called this overprotection love with an iron fist. Barbara was multifaceted. Neighbors recalled that she never took part in street parties and kept to herself, but always nodded affably when she made eye contact. Those who knew her better spoke of her as a woman with deep inner fears. She was afraid of old age, loneliness, loss of control. Therefore, her house was always perfectly clean. Everything was in its place, and even the books on the shelves were arranged alphabetically. Sometimes, in rare moments of candor, Barbara would tell how she dreamed of becoming a writer, of creating her own novel, a psychological thriller about a woman whose life is like an iceberg, order on the surface, an abyss deep down. But work, children, everyday life. All this crowded out her ambitions. She transferred her need for control to the world around her, to her children, to her colleagues, to her image. It became a way to cope with anxiety. As Rachel grew older, the tension between them began to grow. Barbara did not accept the idea that her daughter was a separate person. She saw her as an extension of herself, a project that needed to be realized. But Rachel grew up completely different, open, emotional, prone to rebellion. At what point did a mother's need for control cross the line into something far more dangerous? Barbara increasingly came to work later than usual. She began to look tired, haggard. Her colleagues assumed that she was ill. She answered questions briefly. Nothing, it will pass. On some days, she forgot important documents, mixed up dates. For a woman whose work schedule was always a model of precision, this looked strange. One of the employees said that she was worried about her daughter, but no one expected how out of control the situation had gotten. Meanwhile, Rachel spent more and more time with Ian. They dreamed of escaping, going anywhere, to another state, to another city, to a place where there were no rules and no one asked unnecessary questions. Sometimes, according to friends, they discussed the details, as if they were playing out a scenario. How it would happen, who would take what, how they would get there. It seemed like just a teenage fantasy, but something in their eyes, especially Ian's, said that for them this was more than just a game. August turned to September and the tension reached a boiling point. Barbara, according to the recordings on the answering machine, tried to negotiate with her daughter. Her voice was restrained, but taut, like a string ready to snap. "Rachel, we need to talk. Don't drag it out. I'm tired of this shadow of war." This was the last voice message that investigators later heard. And a few days later, Barbara simply disappeared. Her co-workers were the first to sound the alarm. She didn't show up for work. She didn't call. She didn't warn anyone. The phone was turned off. No one answered her home calls. The neighbor downstairs noticed that no one had turned on the lights in the apartment since the evening. But no official police report was filed. Too little time had passed. Too much speculation. Rachel, who was finally reached by phone, said that Mom went away for a couple of days to recharge. That's how she explained her absence. And she added, "Don't worry, she's just tired." 3 days passed, and everything remained the same. No calls, no letters, no signal. During this same period, a few miles from Huntington Beach, in the Newport Beach Harbor area early in the morning, 2 fishermen who were out on the water looking for grouper noticed a strange object in the water. It was drifting not far from the shore, caught in the seaweed. At first, they thought it was trash, an old blanket, or a bag lowered from a boat. Then there was a thick smell. Something about it was alarming. As they got closer, the men saw that the object wasn't just trash. They called the Coast Guard. An hour later, the police were already working on the pier. It became clear the body of a woman had been found. It took less than a day for forensic scientists to determine who it was. The solution was not brought by intuition, not by documents that were missing, but by the serial number of a medical implant found in the body. This technical detail allowed them to identify the deceased. It was Barbara Ann Mullenix, 56, who lived in Huntington Beach. A woman who, according to her daughter, just decided to go away for a little vacation. For investigators from the Newport Beach Police Department, this call initially did not seem out of the ordinary. Bodies are occasionally found in coastal areas, most often accidents, sometimes suicides. But this case was not one of their standard protocols. The first task facing the investigation was to establish the identity. Fingerprints did not give a result, but at the morgue, while examining the body, the pathologist noticed a medical implant. It was a relatively rare type of breast prosthesis, on the internal capsule of which there was a unique serial number. This number was used to contact the manufacturer and then to the clinic where the operation was performed. Thus, the woman's name became officially known, Barbara Ann Mullenix. Now the Huntington Beach Police entered the case. According to internal logic, the first step was to visit the deceased's place of residence. The task force arrived at the address where Barbara lived, accompanied by a court warrant. Visually, everything looked calm. The doors were locked, the blinds were lowered, there were no signs of disorder outside. However, inside the apartment greeted the investigators with an uneasy silence and a subtle, barely perceptible atmosphere of an interrupted life. On the kitchen table lay unpaid bills, dated recent dates. In the sink, an unwashed cup with the remains of tea. The bedroom was partially dismantled. The bed was missing a sheet. The pillows were unsymmetrical. The mattress was shifted. On the floor, several stains which at first glance looked like spilled juice, but the consistency and color aroused suspicion. Investigators seized material for analysis. Scanners showed traces of biological fluids. Later, the lab confirmed it was blood. Not just stains, but clear traces of an attempt to wash it off. A forensic team was called in. There was no alarm in the conversation, but in retrospect, he remembered. His daughter's voice was tense, as if she was reading a prepared text. The police immediately put Rachel and Ian on the wanted list. And if her calm explanation was rehearsed, who was she really trying to protect or hide from? Credit card tracking systems were activated via a partner database, and within 24 hours, it became known that the couple had appeared in Louisiana. They rented a motel, used a card in Ian's name, made small purchases: water, snacks, cash. They were detained at a gas station. They did not resist. The first interrogation took place in the presence of lawyers. Rachel insisted that she had nothing to do with her mother's disappearance. She claimed that she was emotionally unstable, often said that she needed to disappear and could have simply left. According to her, the night before her disappearance, they had an argument, after which Barbara left the apartment and never returned. It was a subtle but noticeable move, to absolve herself of responsibility by leaving a loophole. However, the investigation already had evidence that cast doubt on her words. Firstly, the surveillance camera installed in the car park near the house recorded two people approaching Barbara's car late at night, figures similar in height and build to Rachel and Ian. They were carrying packages and loading them into the trunk. This happened at about 2 in the morning, several hours after the presumed time of death. The camera did not record faces, but the clothes and gait were studied by experts, and they almost certainly stated these were Rachel and her boyfriend. Secondly, traces of Rachel's DNA were found on things found in the apartment: a pillow, a piece of a sheet, even scraps of tape. Investigators concluded Rachel, at the very least, helped get rid of the body, and most likely, she was present at the crime. Meanwhile, Ian behaved coldly and detachedly. During the interrogation, he remained silent for a long time, and then stated that things didn't go to plan. He said that the conflict between Barbara and Rachel had reached its climax, that at some point everything had gotten out of control, that he was trying to protect Rachel. In this version, he portrayed himself as a savior, not a killer. But his story was full of gaps. An important role was played by the correspondence between Rachel and Ian, recovered from her phone. There were messages sent several days before Barbara's disappearance. They discussed taking a big step, getting rid of the problem, starting a new life. These messages were not direct confessions, but in the context of what was happening, they sounded threatening. One of the investigators would later say, "At this stage, it became clear. This was not an impulsive crime. It was not planned in detail, but they had clearly discussed the scenario in advance. And yet, despite the evidence was circumstantial, and the prosecution knew it had to be enough to convince the jury of premeditation. An important step was examining the laptop seized from Ian. The browser history revealed search queries made weeks before the crime. Death and punishment in California. Police jurisdiction zones. These queries were not made on the day of the crime. They were a sign of preparation. A transcript of the text messages from the day before the murder was also read, in which Rachel wrote, "I hope you're here when it all starts. I can't live without you." These lines caused a deathly silence in the courtroom. The court heard evidence from a forensic pathologist. It was a murder committed in panic. Also shown was a video from a gas station in Louisiana, where a few days after the crime, a camera captured Rachel and Ian. They were smiling, eating snacks, joking at the checkout. This contrast between the moment after the brutal murder and their relaxed behavior astounded the jury. The prosecutor asked, "Is this what remorse looks like? Or is this the cold, indifferent reaction of a man who has already decided that he got away with it?" Ian's lawyer, in turn, tried to convince the court that his client did not plan the murder. Allegedly, everything happened by chance. The conflict turned into a fight. He intervened to protect Rachel. But again, the evidence did not match this version. The layout of the apartment, the timing of the events, everything indicated that the attack began suddenly and was prepared in advance. In addition, traces of Barbara's blood remained on his clothes, seized after the arrest, despite attempts to wash them. The key moment was the questioning of Rachel herself. She was called to court, and under oath she told her version of events. Her voice trembled, but the words sounded rehearsed. "I didn't want to do this. I asked him not to do it. I thought we would just leave. I thought Mum would let us go. I didn't know he was capable of such a thing." She portrayed herself as a frightened daughter drawn into tragedy. But on cross-examination, the prosecutor caught her in a contradiction. "Why didn't you go to the police? Why did you run away with him?" There was no answer, only silence. Only tears. But the jury had already begun to form an opinion. After weeks of hearings, witnesses, and evidence, sentencing day arrived. The jury was tense to the point of breaking point. The jury returned with a verdict after 8 hours of deliberation. Rachel Mullenix, guilty of first-degree murder. Ian Allen, guilty of first-degree murder. Their faces were almost expressionless, as if they knew there was no other outcome. The judge sentenced Rachel to 25 years without the possibility of parole. The court took into account her age and the influence of her senior partner. Ian Allen, then 21, was given life without parole. In his closing remarks, the judge said, "You both took life, coldly, methodically. You had the opportunity to stop, but you went all the way. Today is the price you pay for that choice. It is justice that may not bring back the dead woman, but it will put an end to this brutal tragedy."